If you've ever brought home a gorgeous orchid or a big, beautiful monstera, only to watch it just sadly fade away, you are definitely not alone. The secret to keeping these plants happy often isn't about how much you water, but what you're watering into. So let's get into it and uncover the science of what your plant's roots are actually crying out for. It's the question every single plant parent asks themselves at some point. And, the most common killer is, of course, root rot. But here's the thing, it's not a personal failure. It's usually just a simple misunderstanding of what these specific plants have evolved to need. The problem isn't you, it's the soil. Or maybe more accurately, the fact that they don't want soil at all. You see, so many of our favorite houseplants, we're talking orchids, monsteras, a ton of philodendrons, they're what we call epiphytes. Out in the wild, they don't grow in the dirt on the forest floor. Nope. They literally cling to the sides of trees, and their roots are just out there, hanging in the open air. And that one little fact, it changes everything about how we should be caring for them inside our homes. So here's the main conflict, right? The roots of a typical garden plant, sitting in soil, they're built for constant moisture. But for an epiphyte, that is literally a death sentence. Their roots are designed for a quick downpour of rain, and then constant flowing air. They need to breathe just as much as they need to drink. Okay, so to really solve this puzzle, we've got to geek out a little bit. We need to go microscopic and really understand the incredible technology that is built right into these air roots. It's a seriously cool piece of natural engineering. This fancy term right here, the velamen radicum, this is the whole secret. I want you to think of it like a high-tech sponge that's wrapped around the actual living root. Its job is to instantly suck up any water it comes into contact with. But, and this is the most important part, it must have access to oxygen to survive. If that sponge stays soaking wet for too long, the living root inside just suffocates. And that brings us to our ultimate mission as plant parents. We have to create a home for those roots that holds just enough water for that spongy velamen to grab a drink, while also having tons of air pockets. That's what scientists call air-to-fiber porosity. It's all about finding that perfect, delicate balance. So how do we actually do that? How do we achieve that balance? Well, let's start with our first contender in the ring, orchid bark. This stuff is the foundation. It provides the structure and, most importantly, all that glorious air. But here's a pro tip for you. Bark is not a one-size-fits-all deal. Not at all. The size of the bark chips, what we call its grade, it has to match the size of your plant's roots. You see, the tiny, delicate roots on a jewel orchid, they need fine bark to make good contact. Meanwhile, the big, thick, chunky roots of a monstera need that large power-grade bark to make sure air can get all the way down into the middle of the pot. And let me tell you, quality matters a lot. A standard bag of fir bark might start breaking down in about a year and a half, and when it does, it gets mushy, collapses, and suffocates the roots. But a really high-quality, aged bark like Pinus radiata, it's much harder, and it can keep its structure for 3, 4, heck, I've seen it documented up to 10 years in some professional nurseries. That means a lot less stress on your plant from constant repotting. Okay, time for our second contender, sphagnum moss. Now, if bark is all about providing air, then moss is the absolute, undisputed champion of holding on to water. Just look at that number, 20 times its own weight in water. It's kind of hard to even wrap your head around. It's because moss is basically made of these huge hollow cells that act like a super absorbent natural sponge. It's amazing for giving that constant little bit of humidity to really sensitive roots. But that superpower is also its greatest weakness. If you pack moss into a pot too tightly, it goes from being a light, fluffy sponge to a dense, soggy brick. It completely gets rid of those crucial air gaps, the root suffocates, and bam, you've got root rot. This is, without a doubt, the #1 reason those grocery store Phalaenopsis orchids end up in the trash. Okay, so let's put them side by side for a minute. Bark gives you fantastic air porosity, but its water retention is kind of low. The biggest risk is that your plant dries out too fast. Moss is the total opposite. Unbelievable water retention, but if you're not careful, the risk of low air porosity and root rot is super high. And notice the other things too, right? Moss is more acidic, and look at the huge difference in how long they last in the pot. So you see, it's not about which one is better. It's about you becoming a horticultural detective. It's about choosing the right tool for your specific plant, in your specific home, with your specific watering habits. Because your choice of media totally changes your watering game. Bark-based mixes are perfect for what we call a soak and dry method. You drench the whole pot, flush it out, and then you just wait for it to dry. Moss, on the other hand, it demands precision water control. You're just adding a little bit of water to rehydrate it, never letting it get waterlogged. Now, the best part is, you don't actually have to choose just one. In fact, most experts create their own blends. This classic aeroid mix is a perfect example. See how it works? It uses bark for the structure and air, some coco coir for steady moisture, perlite for drainage that never breaks down, and just a little bit of sphagnum moss to create these perfect little pockets of humidity for the roots to find. It's the best of all worlds. And you absolutely have to think about your home's climate. If you live in a really dry area, or if your heater is blasting all winter, you're going to need more water retention. That means more moss or finer bark. But if you live somewhere humid and tropical, you need to go for maximum aeration with coarse bark to stop things from staying wet for days on end. And of course, the plant itself gets a vote. Different orchids have evolved with different needs. Those thick-rooted cattleyas, they need coarse bark so they can dry out fast. The fine-rooted oncidiums are more sensitive, so they appreciate a mix that holds more moisture. And then you have vandas. They often prefer no media at all, just their big roots hanging right out in the open air. All right, and finally, the choice of what material we use, well, it has an impact that goes way beyond just your plant. So let's quickly touch on the environmental footprint of these different options. It's really important to know the difference here. Peat moss, which people often confuse with sphagnum, is dug up from the bottom of bogs and is, for all intents and purposes, a non-renewable resource. Sphagnum moss, on the other hand, is harvested from the living surface and can be renewable on about a 5 to 6 year cycle if it's managed properly. And then you have orchid bark, which is a byproduct of the timber industry, making it super sustainable. I mean, the difference is just staggering when you see it like this. Peat renews at a snail's pace, just 1 millimeter per year. Sphagnum is much, much faster, but bark is part of an ongoing renewable harvest cycle that's already happening. This is really the best case scenario, right? Using orchid bark is a fantastic example of a circular economy in action. We're taking something that used to be a waste product from a renewable industry and turning it into the perfect high-performance home for our plants. It's a total win-win. So the mix in your plant's pot isn't just dirt, it's a custom-designed life support system. It's a conscious choice you make that balances the needs of the plant, the environment in your home, and even sustainability. So now that you know the science behind it, what's your choice going to be?